Good morning.
Good morning.
A couple of weeks ago I talked about the very first steps that you take in Lojong practice, which is studying the preliminaries. And those preliminaries consist of 4 slogans, which I talked about and we went over at that time. Today I want to start what is referred to as the actual practice, which in Lojong is first of all an examination of bodhicitta. And I know that many of you have acquired the books that I've been studying and are studying along with me, and that we're going to probably examine all this in the book club that we have. But I intend to continue with these lectures on Lojong and discussing each one of these slogans so that they become apparent and available to everybody, whether they're reading the text or not. I have found this practice to be extremely invigorating. It has answered a lot of questions that I have had and offered solutions to a lot of difficulties that I have had in my own practice. The definition of bodhicitta is most commonly given as the desire for awakening. But when you open up the Lojong and start reading the slogans, it's not very much about awakening per se. It's mostly about a discussion, a very long discussion about compassion. And bodhicitta is, in fact, compassion. Every religion, I think, that I'm familiar with has an idea about personal transformation. And within the Mahayana tradition, spiritual awakening is the path of transformation. Bodhicitta is the manifestation of that awakening. And as the manifestation of spiritual awakening, it's indistinguishable from it. Which is why we read a great deal in Lojong about compassion instead of about awakening. It's the same thing. It's 2 sides of the same coin. The Lojong begins with, first of all, a discrimination, as any good Buddhist text begins with. And the discrimination is between what is referred to as absolute bodhicitta and relative bodhicitta. Does anybody want to tackle trying to explain what the difference is here? How many people have read this first part of the book?
Well, relative bodhicitta is the actual physical, mental practice. That's what I took away from it. Absolute bodhicitta is, as you just said, awakening, and it is out there and isn't, although it's the realization of that plays into these, it seems to be a far-off goal as opposed to we can actually manifest relative bodhicitta every second of every minute of every day.
I'll take a shot at it, not having read the book.
Good.
So, out of total ignorance, out of ignorance, I'll take a shot at it.
Good.
I would guess that absolute bodhicitta is the realization of impermanence, no self, and what's the other one?
Emptiness.
Emptiness, yes. And that the relative bodhicitta is the application of that realization
Right.
in the relative world, to one to another,
Right.
or one to many.
Well, what I got out of it was that absolute, you're in a dreamlike state. Everything is love. You feel love for everybody. I mean, there's just love all around, and it's that, it's living that, understanding that the world is full of love, and then when you get to the relative, it's not that easy, because you have all these challenges that the love is hard to see sometimes. So it gives you a practice of how to actually, I guess, bring the absolute into the relative. But I liked reading about the absolute. It's nice sometimes to be in that childlike state. He talks about the childlike state too, being a child. That there is love, no matter what's going on, there's love everywhere.
You're right about relative bodhicitta. Relative bodhicitta is about the application of compassion. That's where the work gets done. And that's relatively easy to understand. I heard a radio broadcast yesterday on NPR about the problems that they're having with these children that are coming across the border in Texas and into Mexico. And some of the reactions that people are having to this, some of those reactions are quite negative. You know, this is an occasion for the application of practical bodhicitta in a big way. And I was trying to figure out what was it I could do about this. And I finally had to conclude that not a whole lot, considering my current state of affairs, my age and my health. But there are things that I still can do, which is open my mouth, which is one thing that I'm doing right now about that problem. Absolute bodhicitta is not something that is a far-off goal, I'm afraid. It is something that is very immediate and something that we are born with. It's not something that is added to us. It is something that is an integral part of us all the time, constantly. Absolute bodhicitta is another name for absolute bodhicitta is Prajna, wisdom, for which this Zendo is named. Another word for absolute bodhicitta is Buddha nature. It is our Buddha nature. It is that part of our mind that is clear and lucid and pervasive, and when we are able, as we sit on our cushion, to finally let go of all of our daily distractions to the best of our ability, we find a part of ourselves that is, as described in the third slogan, as unborn awareness. And unborn awareness is absolute bodhicitta. It is loving kindness. It is compassion that is part of our Buddha nature. This, I think, is a very important, for me, it was a very important realization. Because compassion has always been problematic in religion, particularly in Buddhism. A very favorite author of mine, a guy by the name of Paul Williams, who was head of Buddhist studies at Bristol University, and a Tibetan practitioner for 30 years, about 10 years ago decided that there was no place for compassion in Buddhism. He couldn't see how he could work compassion into his practice. Now this was a Tibetan who had the Lojong practice right in front of him. I mean, Lojong practice is one of the basic, it's foundational in Tibetan practice. And he converted back to Catholicism. And this is a man who was an academic, to be sure, but also a practitioner who was an expert in Mahayana Buddhism. It occurred to me that this business about compassion is probably one of the few arguments in favor of the existence of God that I would agree with. Because Abrahamic religions, such as Christianity and Islam and Judaism, incorporate compassion into their religion in the figure of an anthropomorphic deity who is compassionate and carries compassion with them, the compassion of Jesus and the compassion of God. Buddhism is a little bit more abstract. It's a little bit harder to get to, but it's there nonetheless, and it's very important. And that's one of the reasons that we practice the way we do. You know, I find it interesting also that when Genpo originated his big mind practice, in addition to big mind as one of the absolute icons, he also had big heart as one of the absolute icons. But big heart never really coexisted very easily alongside big mind, because big mind, after all, has no feeling. It contains contains everything, but including big heart, but it does not necessarily incorporate compassion as a manifestation of its activity. And finally, he finally, correct me if I'm wrong about this, Roshi, a few years after he started big mind practice, he took big heart away from the absolute side of the equation and put it in the at the apex.
I'm not sure, but I imagine so.
Yeah.
Which I think is, you put it where?
At the apex of the triangle. At the apex, you know, between the region between the relative and the absolute.
I think there are two triangles. There's the big mind triangle and the big heart triangle.
But the manifestation of compassion is
at the apex.
Is at the apex.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also a characteristic of our Buddha nature, human Buddha nature.
May I say something?
Sure.
Trungpa once said that, I don't know if I read this or heard it from him, one glimpse of shunyata is so terrible that compassion arises automatically.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm well aware of that quote, and I've thought a great deal about that quote.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I find shunyata so terrorizing. Do you?
It can have that aspect, not terrorizing.
Terrifying.
Terrifying.
All right, terrifying.
Yeah, because of it implies the loss of self.
Well, I know that the loss of self, you know, is something that most students, beginning students, have, certainly. I mean, I had that as well.
Had one.
Well, terrified at the loss of self. You know, And the self is always trying to find a way to claw itself back into existence.
Indeed.
And very often it's very successful at doing so. But I think that once you get to the place of not knowing and no self, that's liberation.
Also.
But I think you have to wait for that in the process of your... I think you have to wait a while in the process of your practice in order to really realize that and become released from it.
Yeah. Typically.
Yeah. So let me start with talking about the first of these slogans. There are 5 of them, and they all relate to absolute bodhicitta. The slogans, of course, are meant to be meditated on or contemplated on, and to somehow increase your appreciation of yourself and of the manifestation of your behavior. So the second slogan is, see everything as a dream. See everything as a dream. What does that mean?
Would you repeat that?
See everything as a dream.
But everything is an illusion.
Everything is illusion? Why is that? How is that?
Well, it's what we've made up. We've put together this world in the way that we want to see it individually. And, you know, other people can see part of it.
Well, the phenomena that we see with our sense organs is really a manifestation of the confusion of our mind, isn't it?
It's how we perceive.
That's very true, you know, and I've talked many times in this Zendo about the fact that, you know, our sense organs are extremely limited in what they're able to project for us. And it's a very small percentage of what is out there, as science has shown us. And I've also talked about the fact, you know, that science, 95% of all scientific activity is concerned with increasing our ability to see and perceive the world around us. In order to do that, we, of course, have to create instruments and different kinds of well, I can think of, you know, the easiest thing to talk about is the visible and non-visible spectrum. You know, the actual spectrum that we see with our eyes is just a very small percentage of the total spectrum available out there, apparently. And we see, accordingly, we see a very small percentage of the world around us. So that, to me, leads to the conclusion that what we perceive as reality is nothing more than an illusion, by and large, or a dream. Now, you can also look at this slogan from a different perspective. You can, if you understand that phenomena are constantly arising and falling away, that our perception of them is never complete. It is always limited in important ways that either through our own ignorance or through our prejudices or whatever, so that, as in the case of the children coming over the border, the governor of Texas has one perception of that, and I happen to have a different perception of that. Both of us are wrong.
Or both of you are right.
Yeah, exactly. slogan is examine the nature of awareness. Now that's Norman Fisher's translation of this slogan. The Tibetans put it a different way, and I kind of favor the Tibetan version. Examine the nature of unborn awareness. I'm very intrigued with this whole business about unborn awareness. You know, I pointed out a few months ago that that phrase actually exists in the book of John in the New Testament. And I think that's very interesting.
In what context?
It was spoken by Christ.
In those words?
Yeah. He was talking about unborn awareness, awareness before the time of Abraham. And, you know, we have a koan about this. What was your face before your parents were born? It's a metaphor that seems to crop up often in various ways. But
Could you say how you would define that? Doesn't, I don't get it, unborn awareness.
well, just like sensual phenomena, the dharma we run into constantly in the course of our lives, are illusions and dreamlike.
Mm-hmm.
We can at the same time ask ourselves, what is it that is perceiving these phenomena? Who is listening to this talk right now? Who is aware of this? Who knows this? That essential awareness that is watching the television screen in your brain somehow, I would call unborn awareness.
Is that any different than the Buddha nature and the other aspects you started out with?
No, it's exactly the same. Because our unborn awareness is our Buddha nature.
You know, Fisher doesn't go so far as the Tibetan guy, Glob, whatever.
Trolloc?
Yeah, Trolloc. You know, he gets into what's the point of considering these things, and in the case of he has a realization that he would like you to arrive at, or it's possible to arrive at after considering. So considering everything as a dream, you know, his reason for his explanation of why we would want to do that is to bring out the samsaric qualities of our sensual experience, our objective experiences. And hopefully on the other side, as you say, coexistent arising, when you consider that, that will give you a little glimpse of the transition into nirvanic perception, I suppose.
Right. Well, let me read you what Control says about this particular slogan. It says, when you look directly at the presence of mind, no color, no shape, no form is perceived. Since mind has no origin, it has never come into existence in the first place. Now, it is not located anywhere inside or outside the body. Finally, the mind is not some object that goes somewhere or ceases to exist. By examining and investigating the mind, you should come to a precise and certain understanding of the nature of this awareness, which has no origin, location, or cessation. But Ani is also right. you pointed out about the essential joyfulness of our existence. And that can be traced directly back to this kind of awareness. It's a very difficult thing to explain. And I don't know that I'm up to it. But I do know that after a period of sitting on my cushion, that I find that to be an occasion of joy. And very often I get up with that in my body. That's what I'm feeling. It's also one of compassion. You know, I have talked many times about the fact that the longer you do this practice, the more compassionate you become. And that's reflected in the fact that you realize the need to atone more often. Until finally, you find yourself in a constant state of atonement. But that's not a cause for malaise. I find it to be a joyful activity.
Atonement for what?
Atonement?
For what?
For all my transgressions.
Oh, you're a sinner. Now we're getting down to it.
Of course. We all, aren't you?
What is sin? Going against the will of God?
No. It's the precepts.
Hmm?
It's the precepts,
The
the vows
precepts?
that I've taken.
Or sin?
No, the precepts are not. Sin is a Christian term.
Okay, what are you atoning for again? You said your sin, I thought.
I'm atoning for the fact that there are times in my daily life when I am not in the present moment. And when I am not in the present moment, I am doing evil.
Then there is good and evil.
Yeah, in this dualistic world, you could say that.
Okay, so you're in the dualistic world we're talking about. Okay. But once you get beyond the dualistic world, there is no good and evil.
Oh, of course.
So there's no atonement.
Well, we atone in this Zendo once every month on the full moon. And what is atonement? Do you know what atonement is?
No, I have no regrets about anything.
Really?
As it says in the song, in the faith mind, the five skandhas come and go like clouds floating in the sky. The three poisons appear and disappear like empty bubbles in water.
That's
and
all
we're
true.
to atone for this?
That's not an occasion for atonement. Atonement is actually being mindful. It's an occasion for mindfulness. That's what our conception of atonement is. Now, pardon?
I think it's also atonement for your behavior, which has caused more suffering.
Right. Then that's not being in the present moment. That's not being mindful.
It's everyday activity. It's being
Sure.
rude to somebody and hurting them with it. And it's simple things. It's not compassion. But I always make an amend for those. Few words.
No, it's not compassion, but it can also be a lack of compassion.
It's self-centeredness.
Right. It's separation.
Basically. It's me thinking about being in my own world
That's right.
only and not considering others. And that's usually when that happens. But they're easily cleared up by waking up to the fact that it was another being that I was hurting and acknowledging that with them.
And the source of that hurt is always to be found in separation.
Right, which always comes back to me.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not comfortable hurting other people. I'm not comfortable with my words or just a small remark. It's the more the more I sit, the less comfortable I am. You know, it's not just a matter of saying, "Oh, gee, sorry." It's a heartfelt recognition
Right.
of that.
Right.
And it's mostly small, what people would consider small things.
And unborn awareness, as the Tibetans would say, is an antidote.
Uh-huh.
Because getting in touch with your unborn awareness is an overcoming of separation. It's a realization of dependent co-arising. It's a realization of oneness.
At one-ment.
Right. And that's called atonement.
Yeah. It's a nice practice.
Does that help, Neil? Does that explain what we were talking about?
You are arranging words.
Well, of course.
That's not Zen for me. Zen is beyond words, it is beyond language.
You know, there are two sides to every issue. There's the absolute and the relative, and the two are the same.
The relative is a manifestation of the absolute. The problem is, you started out, the first thing you said was that you have awakening and then the manifestation of awakening, which is bodhisattva or compassion. I go along with that 100%. But the problem is, if you say, okay, I'm going to be compassionate, that leads you to the idea of merit.
Yes,
Of
that's
doing
right.
good.
That's right, and I'm
You
not
become-
suggesting that.
You become attached to one little part of the manifestation.
I'm not suggesting that at all.
I know.
This is not something you should do. This is not about should. This is about who you are.
I'm not. Go back to Bodhidharma. Who are you?
Thank you very much.